Welcome to another episode of the Tour on Air podcast. And I'm thrilled to talk to an absolute expert in the educational space that I'm very passionate about. Welcome, Wes Kao, co-founder of Maven.
Hey, Nico. Great to be here.
So Wes, you are literally, I think, the biggest expert that I've come across when it comes to cohort-based learning. Before we dive into what cohort-based learning is, some of the listeners may know that TOR actually just pivoted into cohort-based learning as well. Very excited personally about the space, having worked in the education field myself when we were still doing kind of print publishing for schools and universities. So really excited about the space. But before we dive in, tell us a little bit, like, how did you actually find your way into the education space?
I started my career in corporate retail at L'Oreal and Gap, and eventually made the switch over to tech startups. And my learning journey into online education really started in 2014 when I packed my bags up from San Francisco, moved cross country to New York to work with Seth Godin. And at the time, Seth had just sold his previous company and was looking to start something new. So I joined, it was just a team of me and him. And it was initially a 6-month project where I was going to help him think through what to dive into next. What should his next big project be? And so one of the projects that I started on right when I joined was creating a Udemy course for him. And in the process of creating this Udemy course, I realized that the completion rates for MOOCs, massive open online courses, video-driven courses in general, were really low. So 7 to 10% of people who start a video-driven course on Udemy, Skillshare, LinkedIn Learning actually finish that course. And I thought that this was odd. And it seemed like a shame because Seth's content was so amazing. And we were putting a ton of love and work into creating this course. So we started kicking around some ideas and challenging the concept that online learning had to be asynchronous, that it had to be massive, that it had to be evergreen, that people could watch it solo whenever they wanted. On the surface, it sounded like that kind of freedom was great. And, if you gave people the tools and the content, then they would just go and learn themselves. But the reality was that there was very little accountability. I personally have a hand lettering course in Skillshare somewhere, a classical music course where I watched a 15-minute lecture and then said, I'm going to come back to this. And it's been 5 years of those courses gathering digital dust, and I still haven't gone back to them. So the lack of community, the lack of accountability, all of that prompted us to think differently about, was there a better way? So as we started kicking around ideas, we inverted basically everything about MOOCs. So we said, instead of it being free, what if we made a course that was expensive? At least that it cost enough for people to feel skin in the game. And instead of it being, do this anytime you want, what if we had set start and end dates and you had to do it during this period of time? And instead of it being a solo activity, what if you did it with a community of like-minded people who wanted to learn alongside each other? And so we put all this together and eventually ended up being the Alt MBA, a 1-month cohort-based course that really kicked off this category in the mainstream. The course is about leadership and management. So, it initially started off as a one-off project. And I was even skeptical myself about whether it could work. Up until that time, the past 10 years, even up until now, really, the dominant form of online learning has been evergreen self-paced courses. So at that time, 2014, 2015, when we first launched the Alt MBA, this was just completely different than anything that existed. And I was skeptical that, could you bring a group of strangers together, have them learn together, and would they open up and would they lean into it and really take it seriously? But from the first day of the Alt MBA, I was blown away by how the students got together, how they created channels in Slack that, were even outside of the ones that we created. They were DMing each other. They were meeting up outside of the Alt MBA. And that vibrant energy, that spirit of collaboration has really continued with every cohort since. So I was at the Ultimate for 3 years, built it up to thousands of students, and then went on to work directly with creators to really see, can we replicate this model? You know, it felt like we had stumbled upon something so precious and something so special at the Alt MBA that I was curious, does this work with other verticals, with other creators, with other people who have a lot to teach? And so that's what I was doing immediately before starting Maven.
And so, I mean, in a way, you defined thereby the category of cohort-based learning. And I remember, like, I was talking to one of my former colleagues in the educational publishing company, and I was like, yeah, this new thing, cohort-based learning, finally something digital with education that seems to really, drive, real engagement with its users. And then he said, well, but isn't that just like a typical classroom? Like, what's the reinvention here? I mean, is this somewhat like going back to how schools function? Like, have you
Absolutely
modeled it after that also consciously?
Yeah. I mean, when you think about Socrates meeting with a group of his students in the village square, learning together, or any classroom, traditionally it's been cohort based. It's just that when the internet arrived and when we thought about putting education on the internet, we thought about it being this one-to-many, massive scaled, asynchronous experience. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about going back to the roots of traditional education, I think the way that we've always learned has been community driven. That if you are learning something by yourself by reading a textbook, you won't learn as much compared to if you were in a group of other people where they are challenging your ideas, you are challenging theirs, you're realizing that people interpret things differently than you do. You have a chance to practice whatever it is that you're learning and realize that, you thought you understood it in theory until you put it into practice and you realize, oh, actually, maybe I don't understand it as well as I thought I did. That usually happens when you are truly learning. It's not a one directional, I'm reading something on my own or I'm watching video, kind of passive experience. So yes, there's absolutely a root in physical spaces that were, time immemorial since the beginning of time, like that vibe. I think the thing that is different though about cohort-based courses is that it's neither purely copying the traditional physical classroom model, and it's not MOOCs. It's not self-paced courses either. It's really a new thing. Mm-hmm. The reason that I say it's a new thing is because cohort-based courses are designed to be digitally native. So it's not the same as parking a video camera in the back of a classroom and then putting people onto Zoom and saying, okay, well now, we're going to do exactly the same things that we did in physical classrooms, because that doesn't work in a digital space. Mm-hmm. There's the levers that you have in a physical space that you don't have digitally and vice versa. So for example, when people are on Zoom, watching a video, sitting in one place for a long period of time, it gets excruciatingly boring. Like, you have to be a really great lecturer to hold people's attention. And even if you are a really great lecturer, it's still hard for people to sit in one space staring straight ahead at a screen. And so cohort-based courses are designed around knowing that we have learners logging in from all over the world, live via Zoom or whatever video software. And the lecturer, the creator, has to think about how to capture people's attention. And it can't just be lecture. It's not just passively listening to the professor, whether the professor was physically in person or, in an edX, Harvard video, both of those are still pretty passive. And so cohort-based courses are all about interactivity. And so I would say that that's one of the biggest differences is the interactivity, and then the focus on the responsibility of the instructor to really hold people's attention and not just monologue for an hour and a half or 2 hours straight and expect people to pay attention.
So looking at the educational landscape, where do you see cohort-based courses now? Is there any data that you have in terms of size of the industry, growth rate, etc.? And where do you see it in years from now? And ultimately, also the educational landscape, the digital landscapes, I mean, where is cohort-based courses? Which other participant is it eating the pie from? Or is it just increasing the educational pie, which seems almost difficult to believe, thinking of like how expensive the educational system is and inefficient all around the world already?
If we look at the past 10 years of online learning, the dominant format has been self-guided, self-paced courses, so MOOCs. Examples are LinkedIn Learning, Udemy, Skillshare, and these were all one-directional, passive content consumption experiences. So with cohort-based courses coming onto the scene, I believe the next 10 years, 20 years are going to be about learning that's community-driven, that's student-centric, that's experience-first, that focuses on practical hands-on skills that working professionals can use to reskill and uptool and improve their craft. So I think that cohort-based courses we're just at the cusp. It's really exciting because this has a format. When Seth Godin and I launched the Alt MBA in 2014, 2015, this was one of the first mainstream cohort-based courses. And since then, there's been a bunch that have exploded onto the scene, especially in recent years. And what's exciting about this is basically creators, subject matter experts, knowledge influencers are basically realizing that cohort-based courses are now a thing. The cat's out of the bag. And when people realize that this is a way that they can better reach their audience, that they can share their expertise, share their knowledge, they're going to want to capitalize on that. And that's what we're seeing. And so I think the next 20 years, we're going to see an influx of non-traditional professors, digitally native professors, really enter the education space. Now, whether this takes away from traditional higher education and whether people choose to learn from these digitally native professors instead of college, university professors, that remains to be seen. What's probably more likely to happen, at least in the short term, is people still go to college, right? I mean, systems and traditions are hard to break. So you still go to college, but as you start working in industry and as you become a working professional, you start taking cohort-based courses to continue learning. And you might do a bunch of cohort-based courses instead of your MBA, for example, right? Instead of getting your master's degree, you might take courses that are actually relevant to exactly what you want to know, exactly what you want to learn. You get to learn from people that you admire in your industry. So I see it being a pie expanding situation where now basically learners are really the ones who benefit from all of this the most, because now we have more options, right? Like you can either learn this from a marketing professor in a four-year university if you want to. You can go back to school, get your MBA. You can take a Udemy course and learn it self-paced, because a lot of times that asynchronous learning format still is great, right? You want that flexibility. So awesome. You maybe take a couple Udemy or Skillshare courses, LinkedIn Learning courses, and then you take a couple cohort-based courses where you want to meet that community. You want something that's more interactive, that dives deeper into that topic. So from the learner side, there's just so many more options for ways that you want to continue learning your craft and improving yourself.
I mean, if I may say, I think you're optimistic on traditional educational system being able to weather this, because, to me, it seems totally inefficient, way too expensive, and fairly I mean, thinking about how many people, pay off their student loans and, the debt burden, that specifically here in the United States, I think it's really actually crucially important that this, ends and that we find a better solution. And whether universities will transform themselves, or not, but I think it is really necessary to fix that educational system the way it's been run at the moment. I think credential play a big role here. And I mean, if you look at surveys or just ask your friends that are paying off their student loans, why they went to college, right? The credentials seem to be the driving force, and so many people also just want to get into Harvard and then they drop out or don't even start, because at least you can say you had that offer on the table or you did your first 1 or 2 semesters. credentials
think,
yeah, sorry, please.
oh no, I was going to jump in on credentials. I love your point.
Because that's the one thing that, with cohort-based courses and online education, it's not quite there yet. So I was just wondering, do you think like credentials will get better, or do you think actually employers just care less and credentials will just play a lesser role in our general education?
There are some creators who want to go the credentialing path and some who don't. So Pomp, for example, who teaches a course on crypto, has thought about maybe offering a credential for his course, a certificate that will show employers that, hey, I took this course, I know about crypto if you're applying to a crypto company. And then there's other courses like Alt MBA, where Seth Godin is staunchly anti-credential and thinks, if you take a sales course, you should get better at sales, not actually have a certificate to show that you took this course. So it really depends on the creator, I would say. But my view on credentialism is that in the past, credentials mattered more because you needed a way to signal that you had the background to get hired at a company or to get this job, to enter an industry. Whereas now with the advent of the internet, there are so many more ways that you can show your work. You can show proof points of your ability. So before, you were basically a one-page resume. That was it. Now you can show your expertise and your work with your portfolio. You can show your blog that you've written for the past 10 years. You can show articles that you've published. You can show how you've grown social media audiences. You can show your taste and design sense via the Instagram feed that you have, right? There's so many ways that you can show that I know what I'm doing and have proof of that, right? You can spin up a microsite, even a Squarespace site that, shows X, Y, or Z about, a side project even. And side projects are a great example of this. I think a lot of employers now, especially more progressive ones, are more interested in whether someone has built something and shipped and created something from scratch, whether it's a side project, a side hustle, or something, than whether they have the right credentials on paper, whether they went to the right school and studied business, right? I would rather someone actually market something than say, oh, I studied marketing. So I think the internet has really changed how people stand out and how each of us can signal that we're great for a certain role or for whatever else by actually just doing the thing instead of getting a credential to say that I learned about doing the thing.
And then there's the whole idea of kind of lifelong learning, right? And the need to update or update your skills or upskill, whatever you say in English. But, with kind of technological advancement, creating new jobs, but also new skill requirements. It seems just that we will continuously learn something. I'm sure you've built also part of your thesis on, but that I think still in some large organizations in Europe, maybe some legacy organizations, is not so center of kind of like the HR activities, and I hope to see more of that. Wes, I'm taking too much of your time. I just, two more questions. One, on kind of like future tech. What do you think? AR, VR? I mean, I've had my first, VR meeting this year. And I was actually surprised. I think it has, made a lot of progress in the past, maybe year or two since I really dug deeper last time. But it seems still kind of, not so accessible and eye straining, etc. I mean, what's your outlook 5-10 years from now, 15 years from now? How will we be using technology for cohort-based learning?
I think there's a million different directions where that could go. And I'm not an expert in AR, VR, or kind of future tech, but I will say that I think a lot of learning is influenced by how people are. And that doesn't really change over the years. People want to be engaged. They want to be immersed. They want to be inspired. They want to be motivated. They want to be held accountable, right? So they also have short attention span. So that, maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, maybe that attention span gets even shorter. But, the idea that a creator or an instructor or teacher can just lecture at their students and assume people will pay attention, I think that era is dead and over. And that going forward, there's going to be more and more technology that enhances the learner's experience. And so how that's done with different emerging technologies, we'll see. But I think it really hits at the core of how do we make something that people want to do and make it more carrot driven versus stick driven. I think traditional education is very stick driven, right? If you don't do this, I'm going to penalize you. You're not going to graduate. You're going to get an F. I'm going to tell your parents. We're going to shame you. Like, these are all stick driven methods.
Like religion.
Whereas going forward, right? Yeah, there's a whole bunch of institutions that are very stick driven. So I think going forward, it's going to be much more carrot driven. Yeah. So I'm hoping that a lot of these emerging technologies will take that into account and be more about inspiring, motivating, and getting people to do things and encouraging people to do them because they want to versus because you have to.
So interactivity, being of course crucial to driving engagement for students in a course, and maybe we can dive a little deeper into what best practices are that you've seen in teachers or instructors doing in their courses. But let's maybe talk through like a few more steps in building a cohort-based course. And Maven, of course, being a technology provider that, helps, with a lot of those aspects in actually setting up and running one's code-based course. So let's start with the first kind of, I have an expertise maybe in a certain domain. How do I go about it? Should I be broad or should I be very niche when it comes to the actual subject matter that I choose?
It really depends on each creator and instructor. So the way that we teach cohort-based course building is to start thinking about course market fit from day one. The reason you want to do that is most course creators will think about what they're excited about, not really worry about marketing. They start building their course. They spend a ton of effort and energy building it. And then they have this course and then they announce it. And a lot of times it's radio silence. It's crickets and tumbleweed. They expected hordes of people to sign up, but there's very few students. So this is very frustrating for a creator. So you really want to avoid that. And the way to avoid that is to think from the beginning about what I call outside in, inside out. Think about 2 circles of a Venn diagram. Outside in is basically looking at the market. What does the market want from you? What are questions that people ask you all the time? What are juicy, expensive, hairy problems that you can help people solve, that people will want to pay you to solve? So a lot of creators are already creating content via a podcast, a newsletter. You might be doing consulting or coaching. So the things that your existing clients or your existing audience want from you is a pretty good place to start. So that's outside in. Now imagine another circle overlapped with that one where it's inside out. So inside out is reflecting and looking inwards on what are topics that you are passionate about and obsessed about and excited about. There might be a topic that people want you to teach, but if you're not excited about it, you won't stick with it long enough to create a great course. So you also want to teach something that you are personally fascinated by and really excited to teach. So it's the Venn diagram overlap of these 2 areas. And if you nail that as a creator, that puts you off to a really great start. So that's step 1, is course market fit. The second step is surveying your audience. That's really important. We've had big creators with Twitter followers, 500,000 to 1 million, who still do this. We ask every creator that we work with to do this because you might think that you know what people want from you, but until you ask them and watch their behavior, watch their reactions, you don't really know. And so a great example is Pomp, Anthony Pompliano. He has 1 million.
Mr. Bitcoin.
Exactly, Mr. Bitcoin. He has 1 million followers on YouTube. He has a course on crypto on Maven, and he originally wanted to build a course for crypto beginners, an intro to crypto course. And when he surveyed his audience, he realized, though, that 60 to 70% of his audience self-diagnosed as intermediate to advanced. So from getting this information, you realize, okay, actually the people who want to take this course already know the basics of crypto. They actually want something that is a little bit deeper. And so he scrapped the curriculum that he had before and made some major changes to cater his course to this exact audience. And he launched his first cohort in January of this year. It's, what month is it? August. He's already run 6 cohorts. Some have sold over $100,000 in course sales in a single cohort, 2 to 3 weeks. So amazing revenue opportunity for a lot of creators. And the way that Palm did it was super smart, because he was thoughtful about what does my audience actually want from me from the very beginning. So actually surveying your audience, getting a sense of what do people want to learn, is something that you want to do, because you don't want to be delusional or separated from reality. If there's a topic that you want to teach that no one wants to take from you, it's better to know that up front, better to know it now, because most people have multiple courses in them. You could teach on a variety of different topics. You're a multifaceted person. You have a lot of experience. You could frame and position your course in different ways. So if you're going to go through the effort of building a course, you might as well know that, hey, there's demand for this. People are excited about it and they want to take this course from me.
And would you generally, I mean, it's probably hard to give a kind of black or white answer on this, but would you generally still go like for maybe first a little bit wider in the topic arena? Because probably a lot of creators, and we are going through the same experience with Tor. We're like, I mean, if we go too niche, maybe we don't get enough applications. But actually, I would like to go very niche, because somewhat my gut tells me I can build a better course. If the value proposition is a little bit sharper, and the profile of the applicants is a little bit sharper, and how do you go about that kind of initial decision? Is that really just surveying, or is there an advice that you give where you say, well, actually try to really better to have 20 members in your first cohort and try to really go after very specific use case, than have 100 or 200 or 300 and something that is a bit more wide in scope?
Yeah, having a course that's wider in scope does not necessarily mean more students. It's kind of like any product where the founder says, well, this product is for everyone. We don't have a target customer because everyone can use this, right? And when we think about it that way, it's obvious that, well, not everyone should use your product. Or at least there are some people that are better suited to use your product, and you should probably cater your marketing to those people. So it's the same with courses. If you are too broad, it's hard for students to know, is this something that is geared towards me? So I recommend creators narrow down as much as possible to a specific topic and a specific target audience. So if you think about, if you were teaching a course on wellness, for example, you could say this course is on wellness, it's for everyone. That's way too broad. If you even got a little bit more specific, you might say, what are topics you can teach, subtopics within wellness? Meditation, nutrition, exercising, mindfulness.
Maybe you go more niche. You say the history of kale.
Exactly. Sure. Right. History of kale. Right. So that's a layer more specific. Sure. But if you go even more specific, if you think about a pyramid, right? Wellness as a broad topic is at the bottom. One layer up is the meditation, mindfulness, etc. And then one layer up even more, the tip of that pyramid is meditation for working parents. So that's a super specific course where if I'm a working parent and I hear this, I think, oh, great. This, I've been wanting to try meditation. This is specifically geared towards people like me. So another example, if you teach marketing, you could say marketing for everyone, very broad. And the other downside of that is it's hard for you as an expert to claim expertise on all of marketing, right? There's a lot of different kinds of marketing, B2B, B2C, all kinds of different types. So you might feel imposter syndrome saying that you are an expert on all of marketing. So if you imagine that's the base of the pyramid, super broad marketing. okay, if we go one layer up the pyramid, a bit more specific, you might say product positioning. You might say SEO. You might say social media. You might say product launches, right? So that's getting a little bit more specific now.
Yep.
And then if you get even more specific, the tip of that pyramid, you might say product positioning for startup founders. You could even get more specific. You could do something like storytelling for technical founders, right? Geared especially towards, non-business founders, right? There's so many ways that you could get specific about what that topic is. And the more specific you are, the better. Not only because you avoid that imposter syndrome from claiming expertise that's too broad, but also because it helps you figure out what belongs in this course. What is the right scope of what to cut or include? So, again, I mentioned a lot of course creators have multiple courses in them. So you might do a course on product positioning for startup founders, and then you might do another course on positioning for launches, right? If your expertise is positioning, there's a lot of different ways you could apply that to different audiences. So it helps you figure out what amount of content to actually create for your course, so you don't get overwhelmed in the content creation process.
Which makes this really such an endless space, right? And I mean, that is so fascinating about it, which, education generally is. But I guess since the barrier to entry now in actually providing an educational solution or a course, however you want to call it, is much lower than, previously, because universities have a lot of courses, but they will never be able to offer that breadth of services that you could be hosting on Maven, for example, right? Because it is just so much more costly to run these courses. So that's really interesting. Do you see in your space, and also with the work that you've done, I mean, just to name a few, you've worked with Scott Galloway at Section 4. You worked here, I'm just reading off Rite of Passage, which is a really interesting one, phenomenally successful writing course by somebody that I believe didn't even have necessarily a writing background. Is that true? But just super passionate about writing. Yeah,
exactly.
Do you see, more, growth potential in the professional market? So, you were saying, marketing or storytelling for technical founders as an example, or in the, I guess the lines are becoming more and more blurry, but, things like meditation for working parents, something that is maybe not very near to one's own profession.
A lot of our initial courses were more around business, startups, strategy, tech. But the beautiful thing about cohort-based courses is this format lends itself really well to any topic where you would benefit from hands-on doing and learning with a group of people. So we now have courses on Maven that are currently being built on yoga, on mindfulness, on photography, different language learning courses, different technical courses. There's one right now on coding for Ethereum. So it's a really exciting space because there are so many experts who are not traditional professors, who have no interest in academia or no interest in teaching at a university, and honestly would probably get rejected from teaching at a university because they don't have the right credentials. They might not have a master's degree or a PhD, but they have years of operating experience. And these are professors that I call digitally native professors. They're people like Lee Jin, who coined the term passion economy. She's a venture capitalist. She works directly with creators in the creator economy. It's people like Lenny Rachitsky, who makes a living writing his Substack newsletter. He was an early product manager at Airbnb. He has a Maven course as well. Both of them do. And these are subject matter experts and operators who are going directly to their audiences to monetize their expertise. And they have full control over when they want to run their courses, what they want to teach, what fascinates them, what they want to engage with their students on. So compared to the rigid system of teaching at a traditional university, there's so much more flexibility for the creator and also for the learner. The flexibility, really extends to the learner because previously you didn't have access to people like Lenny or Lee or people like Sean Puri Sean has a power writing course that he started working on a couple months ago. He's already done one cohort. He's gearing up for a second. And it's all about how to use writing to get what you want. Mm-hmm. And to think about it, writing in a modern way, the way that we communicate via Twitter or via email or, even in person. How do we use writing as modern professionals to really leverage our time and energy? And so, and he's grown his audience tremendously quickly. So previously you just didn't have access to people like Sean to learn his principles, the foundational elements that he wants to teach. So for the learners, there's much more access to topics and individuals and experts that are relevant to your field, learning from people who have real world experience, which I think is really, really exciting.
And let's talk about a few more of the steps then in sort of launching your own course. Marketing is another one. I assume obviously using a platform will help a creator because, you will bring some traffic to it. But how does one, convert one's own, existing community or even build a community? What are some of the things that you've seen working? I always hear and have experienced this, that in education it is a product. It's not selling shoes online, right? It needs a lot of context, a lot of information, multiple steps sort of in a customer's journey until purchase. So content marketing and kind of nurturing that lead becomes really important. Is that true in your experience? What other things have you seen? Are there small little hacks as examples that you were surprised to see working?
One of the biggest misconceptions about selling and marketing cohort-based courses is that it's a one-step sale, that it's an impulse purchase.
Yeah.
A $500 to $5,000 course is not an impulse purchase. Yeah. If you're looking at a $20 Udemy course or $50 Skillshare course, maybe you buy it because you're feeling it and think, if it sucks, oh well, no skin off my back. But if you're about to make a premium purchase, it's something that most prospective students want to think about and make sure is right for that. So you'd mentioned, nurturing that lead and having a multi-step sales funnel. That is super important because you need to build up trust with your prospective student. Now, if you're someone who has been building that trust for a while and your audience already trusts you to create great content and they've bought from you in the past, that sales cycle can be a lot shorter because you've already done that heavy lifting of building that trust. But if you're someone who is just now starting out building your audience, just now starting to engage with your community, then of course it makes sense that, if you just show up one day and say, hey, buy my $1,000 course, people are going to be a little bit skeptical. So you do want to show that you know your stuff, that you can solve their problems and really prove to them that you're going to add value. So you can do that in a bunch of different ways. One is creating content around your topic, creating content that already solves people's problems, your target audience's problems, where they want to know even more about how you would approach this if you were to go deeper in a course, right? So that's one way. Another way is to show up in communities where your audience is already hanging out. So a good example of this is Shivani Berry. She's one of Maven's instructors. She started her course about a year ago, and she didn't have an audience or social media presence. Before that, she was working at Intercom or PayPal as a product manager. So she was in-house. She wasn't trying to build her personal brand or anything. So when she decided to build her cohort-based course, she was kind of starting from scratch with her audience. So instead of lamenting about it, she thought, well, how can I think of creative ways to get in front of the people who would really benefit from my expertise? So one big way that she did that was doing fireside chats with women leaders in tech. So her course is on leadership for women, geared towards women in tech. So she would reach out to different women to do fireside chats. And then these leaders would then share this recording to their audience, right? So she got access to their audience that way. Mm-hmm. She would post in different women in product communities, women in tech, women product managers. So Alpha, Y Combinator's community for women, she posted there. So that was another way she was showing up in the right places. And she put a lot of thought into doing webinars too for inside different companies. So she would go to Amazon or Walmart or Nike, and she would give a 1-hour presentation on how to work with dominant personalities or how to advocate for yourself. So here she's adding value. She's not just selling her program, because no one wants you to come in, and sell to their people, but she's adding value 90% of the time. And then 10%, she's giving a quick shout out to, hey, if this is interesting for you, I run this program that's 6 weeks long where we dive a lot deeper into topics like this. Mm-hmm. So these are all ways that even creators with small audiences can really add value, build trust, tap into places where their audience and their target student is already hanging out, and really start building that momentum towards selling their course.
So does that bring sort of also the challenge with attributing sales to a given channel? Is that something you do in surveys after, or, I'm sure that was maybe a question you had to tackle with all the consulting that you've done and being a co-founder at the Alt MBA. How does one go about that?
Yeah, attribution is always tricky, especially if you're in the beginning stages. Mm-hmm. If you're a creator and you're launching your first cohort, you're working solo and you have 15, 20, 30 people in your course, the way that you're tracking attribution is not going to be a hard science. It's going to be directional. It's going to be qualitative. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't put too much of an emphasis on hard science A/B testing, mm-hmm. Trying to get huge sample sizes to actually run a great A/B test, because your numbers are just too small. Yeah. You're just getting started. So, and there's so many other things that you are trying to build as you go that you're not really controlling for variables in the way that you would need to do a real A/B test anyway. So I think early on, don't worry too much about attribution. I think about stay alert to signals and clues about what is generally working and what is generally not working. So, for example, instead of worrying about UTM tracking links, for example, if I send an email to 50 people with a certain copy and no one replies, mm-hmm. certain subject line, no one replies, that's a good sign that this didn't land. Yeah. And then I update that subject line, change the copy, change my CTA, and then, I get a 20% response rate. Good, great. Like, I should do something more in this area. Yeah. I don't know if it was, what it was in particular about, right? There's still so many other variables.
Maybe of what it could be. Weekend, weather was too hot.
Exactly. Yes. But at least that directionally gives you something to dive deeper into. So it's very much an experimenting, iterating posture that you want to have. And even with our course, the Maven Course Accelerator, the course that I teach, it's a 3-week course where we teach creators how to build a cohort-based course. It's very meta, I know. So even with our course, I've iterated a bunch of times in the last couple of months. So I initially launched it in February, and it was 1 week. Then I launched it again a month after, expanded it into 6 weeks, ran it twice at 6 weeks. And then our upcoming cohort starting next month is 3 weeks. So even for us, we are constantly playing with how long should this course be? What price should it be? What type of student do we want to cater to? Is this for beginner, first-time course creators, experienced course creators? Yeah. Even within experienced course creators, there's different types. Beginners, there's different types. There are people who have more business savvy and certain people who have a little bit less coming in. So you have so many things, so many variables that you're thinking about, that as you're getting started, you really want to put together an initial hypothesis that you think will work great. And that might look like, I want to do a 1-week course geared towards this kind of person. I'm going to price it at this. I'm going to put it out there, see what the response rate is, and then iterate from there.
Yeah. And once you have your, kind of leads and applicants coming in, should one accept everybody? Should one, try to have some type of filter that maybe traditional universities, would have, and look at certain criteria that one kind of wants to establish so that everybody is maybe also more relevant to one another, since the social component is so important in the courses? Or do you do both on the platform?
It depends on your topic and your posture as a creator. So there are some courses that have rigorous applications. Yeah. Alt MBA is a good example. We curated the class very tightly because the interactions among the class were the main value of the program, not the content. So that's an example where an application process made a lot of sense. We have people answer short essay questions. We look at their background. So that's on one extreme. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's a lot of courses that don't have applications. So Section 4, Scott Galloway's course, which I helped design, doesn't have an application, and it still works great. The way that they control for really getting the right people in the course is through great expectation setting from the beginning. So the landing page explaining, here's what the course is about, here's who it's for, here's who it's not for, here's what we're going to cover, here's what we're not going to cover, right? Here's what you're going to do in this 2-week sprint. So you're already attracting the right kind of person and repelling tire kickers, people who weren't going to take it seriously, people who weren't a good fit to begin with. So applications aren't the only way to ensure that you get like-minded people in the course. Yeah. And there's a lot of courses besides Section 4's, a lot of Maven courses where there is no application process, that there are other levers that we're using to make sure it's the right group of people that are attracted to the course. So I mentioned a couple of those with setting expectations, saying who it's for. The other one that really helps to prevent people who weren't going to take it seriously is price point. So if someone is a troll, they'd have to be a pretty serious troll to want to pay $750 to go into your course to troll you. I mean, it can happen, but it's much more likely to happen if your course were free, for example. So there are different gating mechanisms that kind of filter out people who wouldn't really have taken it as seriously. And then, I mentioned the spectrum. So there's the extreme, hard, rigorous application where you're rejecting most people. And then there's no application at all. There's a lot of courses in the middle too, where you have a light application of some sort, where it's meant to more get a sense of who are you as a professional, making sure that you have the right expectation set. So General Assembly is a good example where, they'll ask you a couple questions about your background, about your level of expertise. If you're applying for a UX design course, have you designed anything before? Are you a beginner? Just so that they can get a sense of whether you're a good fit. So there's a lot of courses in that middle area. So it really depends for you as an instructor, where you want to be on that spectrum. And there are a lot of courses and topics where it makes sense to have a more tightly curated group. And then there's other courses where, if someone is interested and they're passionate and they have the right expectation set, you want to be more inclusive. You want to make your material more accessible and not try to have a really low acceptance rate. You want to be a little bit more democratic. So it really depends on the creator.
Yeah, it's also almost, an attractive, I guess, departure from, what Ivy League universities do, which is sort of with increasing demand, not actually increase supply, but rather increase price, which seems to be or have been the model of top universities around the world. And you wonder why, right? Why they wouldn't just increase supply. I mean, they have maybe to a certain degree, but generally it's been increasing price with increasing demand. So once you have, your applicants and, the cohort starts, in the beginning, you spoke about sort of how important it is to have an interactive course. So tell us a few examples. What have you seen, work very well, both from a, I guess, kind of structural component. So having a Slack group, if so, a lot of channels, should everybody be able to open their own channel? Do you need a community manager? How do you keep the engagement high within the group? And also from an instructor side, what can instructors do and how can the courses be designed in terms of programming to be very interactive? Do you have social components also where people maybe just meet up once a week to drink a coffee together and, not have an instructor present? What are some of the things you've seen work well?
I think the most important things are the instructor's expectations going in. Mm-hmm. So 2 things around that. One is what I call the state change method. And this is a way of lecturing on Zoom where you're lecturing probably 25, 30% of the time, 75, 80% of the time, it's interactive. So what I mean with the state change method is normally an instructor monologues for, let's say, an hour. So with the state change method, you're punctuating every 3 to 5 minutes. You are doing something interactive. You're either asking your audience a question, you're telling them, hey, chime into the Zoom chat box, or you're saying unmute yourself to share your answer, or you're saying we're going to go into a breakout now, or we're going to do a guided exercise where we all stay in gallery view in Zoom. We're all staying in one place, but we're silently going to work on something, and then we're going to share out what we worked on, maybe hold up something onto the camera screen to share everyone else, and then we talk about it. So the state change method is about every 3 to 5 minutes punctuating your monologues so that there are state changes of some sort. So that's important for the instructor so that when they're creating their materials, they design with the state change method in mind. The other is remembering that the reason that cohort-based courses are exciting and engaging for your students is it's not usually because they want more content. Very rarely have I seen a student finish a course and say, gosh, I really wish there was more content. They usually say, I wish there were more time to meet other students. I wish there were more time to discuss this one topic. I wish there was more time to connect with the coaches, right? It's usually something that's interactive. And it's this bi-directional learning that is what students are here for. In the old way, the lecturing, sage on stage, professor in the front of the room, self-paced course format, it was always an expert telling you and you passively sitting there absorbing and listening. Whereas with cohort-based courses, the learning is bidirectional, meaning that sure, instructors teach students, but students also teach instructors. We've had a lot of instructors say that they were surprised that they learn just as much from their students as their students learn from them, because their students would take the principles that they taught them and then create interesting work from it, or they would come up with examples that the instructor hadn't even thought of. They'd come up with edge cases or use cases, then they would share amongst each other. So students are teaching the instructor back, and then students are also teaching each other. So this rich environment where students get to teach each other, it's much more bidirectional, maybe even call it tri-directional, because, instructor to student, student to instructor, student to student, is what creates a lot of that interactivity. So instead of instructors thinking, I have to be the source of all engagement, I have to be the source of all interactivity, really letting go a little bit, that is kind of a mindset shift for most creators, letting go a little bit and saying, what are ways where my students can connect with each other? Can I encourage them to chime in and answer a question instead of me jumping in to answer a question? And a lot of times when you encourage that, your students are giving each other better inspiration, better examples, better answers than you would have come up with yourself.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes it also, I guess, from an instructor's point of view, maybe more easy to integrate into one's professional life. The courses, what would you say? Is there kind of like a benchmark number of hours that you advise an instructor to kind of dedicate to, preparing a course and running a course? Is there, or is that really depends on just the level of expertise and the scope of the topic?
80% of running it and building a cohort-based course is upfront effort.
Yeah.
20%, once you've built it, you have this asset and you can turn on your course at any time. So there is an upfront investment in making sure that the content, the curriculum, the activities all make sense. It really does depend on the creator's level of expertise on their topic, how how experienced they are at teaching, if they know their scope already. So there are a lot of creators who have been teaching in-person workshops, for example, for years, right? So if they wanted to turn their course into an online course, they already have a lot to work with.
Sure.
There's a lot of creators also who have written a book that they want to turn into a course. So even in those situations, there's still work to create the course, because it's kind of like turning a feature film, a movie, into a Broadway play. Mm-hmm. In the movie, you have the script, you have the plot, you have the characters, you have the dialogue all written, you have the scenes and setting. But when you translate, Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise, into a Broadway play, there's certain things that you can't do, in live theater that you can do in a movie, and vice versa. There's certain things that you can do in live theater that are much more geared towards that medium. So you still have to think about what makes sense for this medium of a digitally native cohort-based course, but you have a lot more content to start with. So usually I advise, if you're a first-time course creator, start with a course that's a little bit shorter, because you have a tighter feedback loop to see what's working and what's not. If you do, a 3 to 4 day course, you get a feedback loop within a week, and then you can iterate and improve it. Whereas if you do a 3 to 4 month course, let's say in week 2, you realize that this is really not working. People are not that happy. You've made a promise that was too big. You have to entertain these students who have already paid for another 4 months. So that's really painful for everyone. So if you can start with something that's a little bit shorter, you finish creating the content sooner, you see the light at the end of the tunnel, you're able to iterate, and it's much more rewarding for you as the instructor.
And I mean, that's the final stage, actually, that I would want to talk to you about on the actual product. And that is sort of like fulfilling the expectation, making sure that, you get a good NPS score on your course. Like, I'm sure, especially for first-time course creator, there is this like fear of like, oh my God, like, am I promising too much? And, what if people are not happy? I mean, what do you do then? Is that you have to have a really good refund policy in place? Have you seen course creators just kind of pivot the course midway together with the student and being very collaborative in nature? How do you advise people to kind of set that up?
Taking course quality seriously is the right thing to do. So feeling a little bit paranoid about, am I adding enough value, is usually a good thing, because your reputation as a creator is really the most valuable thing for you. So if you create a course that, has negative word of mouth, or people feel like, oh, this wasn't really worth the money, you're going to lose a lot of trust with your audience. And so being a little bit paranoid is a good thing. I find that if you set expectations well up front, upstream during the process, that's going to save you a lot of trouble. So I wouldn't really rely too much on, well, if you don't like it, I'll just give you a refund. I mean, that's a tactic to close sales, right? If someone, money back guarantee, fine. But ideally, you want to be confident enough in your product that that people aren't really going to use that, and you might not even need to offer that. So I think creating that high bar for yourself of, I want to add a lot of value, and staying close and in touch with who your target student is, so that you can set expectations with them up front. I think that's the important thing. If someone expects XYZ and you are going to offer ABC, then there's a disconnect there. And no matter how good ABC is, they're still going to be upset that you didn't give them XYZ. Mm-hmm. So that's why, kind of coming full circle, thinking about course market fit, surveying your audience, talking to your actual students, prospective students, getting on the phone with them, right? Per nurturing that lead, really understanding how you can support them and making sure that they're a good fit for your course before you admit them. All of those things prevent issues down the line, so that when you actually have your start date for your course, people are ready, they know what to expect, they're excited, and you're able to deliver.
Yeah. The one question we ask everybody on the show is around iteration and pivoting. And you already talked a little bit about your own course, your own creator's course that you give, and how you're, iterating. And I wonder what your process is like when you are faced with the decision, whether sort of to incrementally pivot or whether to really, do a detour and, like properly pivot. So let's say incrementally change versus, actually a proper pivot. Have you, had similar situations in the past where you had to make that choice? And, what were some of the ways that you went about it? Mental frameworks? Are you talking to a friend? Do you benchmark for, what other companies have been doing? Like, how do you decide? Is it a gut decision?
I think in terms of the main thesis that we have for Maven and the long arc, we've only been around for a year also at this point. So we haven't had any major pivots really, but on a day-to-day basis, my co-founders and I change our minds all the time. I think this is a strength of ours, that we have strong opinions loosely held. So if we're doing something in a certain way, I always tell my team members that if you want to blow this up, do it completely differently, scrap this and invent something new, that's totally okay. It just has to, you have to have a hypothesis though, that and rationale of why this new thing is going to beat the incumbent, that it's going to be better than whatever is here now. And so this mindset of, not being too attached, too emotionally attached to anything that you've created. I think a lot of the reason that sunk costs are so hard to ignore is because there is that internal agony, the shaming, right? The shame of like, oh, like I already spent so much effort on this. We've already, invested so much. It's hard to walk away because you're beating yourself up. And so one thing that I try to think a lot about is, not having that attachment to whatever it is that I built. Yes, I might have spent a lot of time on it, but if it's not the right decision now, then we shouldn't double down on it. So one phrase that I like is what I call new situation, new decision. So if you're in a new situation now, make a new decision that's going to serve you going forward, which is why, given the example of our course, how we've changed it a bunch of times, when we realized with the 1 week course that, wow, this is a lot to teach people in a week. We kind of knew that going in. We had kind of had that hypothesis going in. It was a bootcamp style, multiple hours per day. We thought, how can we make this a bit longer and make each week a little bit more doable? So we did, right? And then we realized, well, 6 weeks, we were hearing from our instructors, basically our students, that this course feels a bit long. It's hard for me to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's really intense to keep this up for 6 weeks. So we are shrinking it to 3 weeks. So I think the other thing to think about here is paying attention and being alert to what people are telling you. I think a lot of times we want to believe something, and so we delude ourselves into thinking like, oh, well, whatever I was doing is right, or I'm going to ignore these people. And there are certainly times to ignore people, but also just thinking, how can I not be delusional? How can I face reality, right? Like I always want to face reality. If there is something that I need to know, like I would rather know it than be delusional about it, because I can make a better choice. I can be more intentional. I can nip something in the bud instead of something becoming, ignored and then becoming a catastrophe 6 months down the line. So don't be delusional, I would say, is my parting words for that.
Great parting words. Wes, thank you so much for your time today, and all the best of luck with Maven.
Thank you so much, Nico.